Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto built a goddess harem with Gabriel, DxD, Aqua, Konosuba, and Hestia, Danmachi. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unraveling. The air in Konohagakure tasted of peace. It was a flavor Naruto Uzumaki was still getting used to. It was in the lazy afternoon haze that settled over the Hokage monument, in the distant. Joyful shrieks of academy students released for the day, in the savory aroma of barbecue drifting from the Akamichi clan's restaurant. It was a peace paid for in blood and bone, a guile tapestry woven from the threads of sacrifice. And he, more than anyone, was its guardian. He stood before the memorial stone, its polished black surface reflecting a distorted image of a young Ma-en with sun-kissed hair and a future that felt both infinitely vast and unnervingly quiet. His hand, no longer wrapped in bandages, rested on the cool stone, fingers tracing the chiseled name of Neji Hyuga. Farther down, Jiraiya, his parents, countless others. The weight of their names was a familiar pressure on his soul, a constant reminder of the cost. The fourth great ninja war was over. Akatsuki was a memory. Kagaya was sealed. Sasuke had returned, not as a prodigal son, but as a brother who had finally found his way home, his arm a testament to their final, brutal, and cathartic clash in the Valley of the End. Now he wandered the world, atoning in his own silent way, but he was tethered to the village. The world was, for the first time in generations, truly at peace. And Naruto was, adrift. It was a strange, almost shameful feeling. This was everything he had fought for, everything he had screamed himself hoarse for. The village no longer saw a demon vessel, they saw a hero. Childer, and who once would have run from him now waved and cheered his name. His friends were moving on, finding their own peace. Sakura was revolutionizing medical ninjutsu and rebuilding the hospital. Uru was already a key advisor to Kakashi, the sixth Hokage. Hinata, she was a gentle, constant presence, a promise of a different kind of warmth he was still too awkward to fully grasp. Everyone had a place, a direction, but his great battle was won. His lifelong quest to be acknowledged was complete. Now, he was just Naruto. A Jinchuriki without a war to fight, a hero in an era that desperately needed to forget what heroes were for. He trained, he went on missions, mostly diplomatic escorts and B-rank errands, and he ate ramen. But the fire that had driven him, that all-consuming need to prove himself, had banked to a low, uncertain ember. What was the purpose of a cannon when the war was over? A soft breeze rustled the leaves of the tree behind him, and he closed his eyes, drawing in the scent of damp earth and living wood. He let his senses expand, a habit he'd picked up from sage mode, feeling the thrum of life in the village. The lazy pulse of civilian chakra, the sharper, brighter flares of active shinobi, the great slumbering warmth of Kurama curled within his soul. It was all connected. It was all safe. So why, he wondered, a familiar ache in his chest, does it feel like I'm on the outside looking in? That was when the world began to die. It didn't happen with a bang. It happened with a whisper. The first thing to go was the sound. The children's laughter, the rustling leaves, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, it all just stopped. Not silenced, but erased. A profound, absolute deafness fell over him, so complete it felt like his eardrums had been scooped out. He snapped his eyes open. The color was next. The vibrant green of the grass bled to a dull, sickly gray. The blue of the sky washed out, turning the color of old parchment. The memorial stone in front of him lost its polished sheen, the stone seeming to crumble into dust even as it held its shape. His hand, resting on its surface, felt a grating sensation, like rubbing two handfuls of sand together. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up his throat. He suppressed it with practiced ease, his body dropping into a defensive stance. Kurama, he projected into the silence of his mind. There was no answer. The familiar, rumbling presence of the Nine Tails was gone. Not distant, just not there. The link was severed. For the first time since he was a child, he was completely, utterly alone in his own head. He could feel no chakra. Not from the village, not from the earth, not from himself. It was like his senses had been cauterized. He was blind in a way that had nothing to do with sight. The world before him began to shimmer, like air over a hot fire. The trees, the buildings, the very ground beneath his feet, they lost their solidity. The Hokage faces carved into the mountain wavered, their stoic features melting like wax. The unraveling accelerated, the fabric of his reality tearing apart like wet paper. A seam of screaming, impossible color split the gray sky, a crack in the world. Gravity became a suggestion. He felt a sickening lurch as the ground vanished, and then he was falling. Not down, just away. He was tumbling through a maelstrom, a hurricane of pure chaos. There was no up or down, no east or west. Ribbons of incandescent light, the color of molten suns and dying nebulas, whipped past him. Shards of what looked like broken worlds tumbled in the non-space around him. A fragment of a marble colonnade, a chunk of scorched, futuristic cityscape, a gnarled, petrified tree the size of a mountain. He was a speck of dust in a cosmic blender. His shinobi training kicked in. A rock of stability in the pandemonium. He forced his body to orient, using minute chakra flares, a desperate act, as the energy dissipated almost instantly, to control his tumble. The chaos had a pressure, a current. He needed to find an eddy, a place to anchor himself. That's when he saw the others. The first was a girl, impossibly small, with dark hair tied into two bouncing twin tails. She was wearing a simple white dress and was clinging for dear life to a floating piece of white and gold altar, her eyes screwed shut and tears streaming down her cherubic face. No, no, no. My familia, my future children, I haven't even found them yet, she wailed, her voice thin and reedy in the psychic noise of the storm. The second was a flash of brilliant azure. A young woman with long, sky blue hair was flailing wildly, her expensive-looking feathered raiment flapping around her. Why isn't anything working? She shrieked, her voice a mixture of terror and utter indignation. She threw her hands forward, and for a moment, a complex magical circle of shimmering water-like energy appeared. Turn undead, sacred create water, anything. The circle sputtered and died, and she let out another frustrated scream. Useless. My divine powers are completely useless here. The third was different. She was a vision of serenity amidst the madness. A woman with hair the color of fire. Nay spun gold floated with a preternatural calm, her 12 magnificent white wings tucked neatly behind her back. She wore a flowing white garment that seemed untouched by the chaotic energies, her unningly beautiful face a mask of careful observation and deep concern. She wasn't panicking. She was analyzing, her violet eyes scanning the tempest, cataloging the impossible. A goddess of the hearth, lost and terrified. A goddess of water, arrogant and powerless. A seraph of heaven, poised and watchful. They were all beings of immense power. He could feel it on a primal level, a scent of ozone and starlight clinging to them. But here, in this place between places, they were as lost as he was. Before he could even think to act, to try and call out to them, the Nexus spit out a new horror. It didn't fly or swim. It coalesced. In a patch of the storm where the light seemed to dim, the absence of color began to hunger. The nothingness gained form. It was canine in shape, a hound the size of a plow horse, but it was made of pure, featureless black. Its body didn't reflect light, it drank it. The brilliant ribbons of energy that touched its hide vanished without a trace. It had no eyes, but its head was cocked, sensing them. A mouth opened in its featureless face, a maw of deeper black, and a soundless snarl echoed not in the air, but directly in their minds, a screech of pure, predatory intent. The blue-haired goddess pointed a shaking finger at it. An agent of the Demon King. I knew it. Finally. Something for a proper goddess like me to smite. She thrust her hands forward, and a sphere of brilliant, holy light, pulsing with divine energy, slammed into the hound's flank. Instead of an explosion, the light simply vanished, swallowed as if it had never been. The hound didn't even flinch. The goddess's jaw dropped. E-H-E-H-H-H-H-H. The golden-haired seraph acted next. With a grace that defied the chaos, she raised a hand. 12 spears of golden light, sharp and crackling with immense power, materialized around her. With a flick of her wrist, they lanced across the void, converging on the creature from all sides. It was a beautiful, deadly display. The result was the same. The spears didn't shatter. They didn't detonate. They just thinned, stretching like taffy as they were drawn into the creature's shadowy skin, winking out of existence one by one. The seraph's serene expression finally cracked, a flicker of disbelief in her violet eyes. My light, it consumes it. The creature, its hunger now focused, ignored the goddesses. It had found a more substantial meal. It turned its eyeless gaze toward Naruto. It could sense him, the monumental life force within him, the echo of Kurama's potent chakra. To this thing of nothingness, he was a feast. It bounded through the non-space, its claws tearing silent holes in reality as it moved. The small, twin-tailed goddess screamed. The blue-haired one yelped and tried to paddle away. The seraph prepared another, larger attack. They were too slow. Naruto didn't think. He acted. There was no flash of yellow light, no dramatic pronouncement. One moment he was floating, the next he was a blur of orange and black, intercepting the hound mid-lunge. The air, or what passed for air here, screamed as a spinning sphere of condensed chakra materialized in his palm. Rasengan. The impact was solid. The spiraling energy tore into the hound's shoulder, ripping a great chunk of its shadowy form away. But there was no spray of blood, no screech of pain. The shredded pieces of its body simply dissolved back into the formless chaos. And the wound in its shoulder began to fill in, the void seeping back into place like ink into water. It regenerated. Instantly, the hound swiped at him, its claws leaving 5 trails of absolute nothing in their wake. Naruto twisted away, the claws narrowly missing his chest. He felt a phantom coldness where they had passed, a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. He needed to understand what he was fighting. Shouting and bigger attacks wouldn't work. He landed on a floating chunk of obsidian rock, his feet automatically adjusting to its spin. He dropped into a low stance, He world's noise fading as he drew in nature's energy. The familiar orange pigmentation appeared around his eyes. The chaos of the nexus, which had been an overwhelming storm, sharpened into a billion distinct threads of energy. And the hound, in sage mode, he could feel it. It wasn't alive. It had no life force, no chakra, no soul. It was a hole, a localized, mobile, hungry hole in the shape of a monster. A cancer of non-existence. Killing it with force was like trying to punch a hole in a hole. Pointless. An idea sparked, born of desperation and a deep, instinctual understanding of the funda. Mental forces his parents had worked with. Sealing. Fuinjutsu. If you can't destroy it, contain it. The hound lunged again, its featureless face a mask of cosmic hunger. This time, Naruto was ready. He didn't dodge. He met it head-on. As it soared toward him, 9 massive arms of brilliant, bubbling orange chakra erupted from his back, the raw power of the 9 tails, even without Kurama's consciousness, answering his call. The chakra arms weren't aimed to strike. They were there to grab. They slammed into the hound from all sides, and for the first time, the creature was stopped. It thrashed, its shadowy form warping and twisting, its claws tearing at the chakra constructs. The orange energy sizzled and dissipated wherever the hound touched it, the void eating away at his power, but Naruto just poured more in. The 9 arms, immense spectral limbs of a caged god, strained, holding the beast of nothingness in a crushing embrace. What is that mortal doing? The blue-haired goddess stammered, her panic momentarily forgotten in her shock. The seraph's eyes were wide. She saw the raw, untamed power, but she also saw the control, the strategy. He wasn't just blasting it. He was wrestling it. Naruto gritted his teeth, the strain immense. The hound's aura of nullity was a constant drain, like holding a block of dry ice that sublimated his very life force. He couldn't hold it for long. He brought his hands together in front of his chest, palms open. Black, intricate lines of ink-like characters began to swirl into existence on his skin, flowing from his palms like living things. They were the complex, spiraling formulas of the Uzumaki clan's most powerful sealing arts, patterns he had spent countless nights studying from the scrolls his father had left behind. This wasn't a brute force jutsu. This was surgery. The chakra arms tightened their grip, forcing the thrashing hound into a compressed, spherical shape. Naruto thrust his hands forward, the seals on his palms glowing with a fierce, violet light. "You can't eat this," he grunted, slamming his hands onto the compressed mass of shadow. The Fuinjutsu matrix flowed from his hands, spreading over the hound's body like a spider's web of light and order. The black characters burned themselves onto the void, defining it, categorizing it, and, finally, containing it. The hound let out one last silent, mental scream of protest. A wave of pure nihilistic despair that washed over them all. Then, with a sound like a giant key turning in a cosmic lock, it imploded. It didn't vanish. It was forced into an infinitesimally small point at the center of the spiraling seal, which then solidified into a small, black orb no bigger than his fist. The orb dropped into his hand, cold to the touch and unnervingly heavy. The pressure in the nexus vanished. The creature was gone, contained. As if his actions had satisfied some unknown requirement, the chaotic storm around them began to calm. The violent currents smoothed out. The shrieking colors softened. A single point of gentle, stable reality opened up below them, a gateway of soft, white light. The nexus, its purpose served, was spitting them out. They fell through the light, and the transition was as jarring as the first. One moment, the chaos of the void. The next, the scent of damp grass and the feeling of solid ground. Naruto landed in a crouch, the black orb clutched tight in his hand. He was breathing heavily, his chakra reserves screaming from the exertion, the phantom cold from the hound's aura still clinging to his bones. He looked up, taking in their new surroundings. They were in a tranquil valley, nestled between gentle, rolling hills covered in grass the color of jade. A perfectly still lake mirrored a sky that was a permanent, breathtaking twilight, studded with constellations he had never seen before. A gentle, cool breeze rustled the leaves of strange, silver-barked trees. The air was clean, pure, and humming with a soft, ambient energy that was neither natural nor divine. It felt new, unclaimed. A few feet away, the three goddesses had landed in a far less graceful heap. The small, twin-tailed girl was on her hands and knees, trembling. The blue-haired woman was sprawled on her back, groaning dramatically. The winged seraph stood, brushing a non-existent piece of dust from her attire, her composure regained, though her eyes were fixed on Naruto. The silence stretched, broken only by the blue-haired goddess's moans. The smallest one, Hestia, was the first to speak. She pushed herself up, her large, crimson eyes wide with a mixture of terror and unabashed awe. She stared at Naruto, at the faint wisps of orange chakra still fading around him, at the dark orb in his hand. You saved us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What was that thing? Who are you? More importantly, where the heck are we?" The blue-haired one, Aqua, cut in, sitting up and pointing an accusatory finger at him. Her face was a mask of suspicion. "This is your fault, isn't it? You, with that weird, monstrous power. You probably attracted that thing. A human shouldn't have that kind of energy." The seraph, Gabriel, took a graceful step forward, her presence commanding a quiet authority. Her violet eyes were sharp, analytical, and held a depth of ancient knowledge. She wasn't accusatory, but her curiosity was just as intense. That energy, the 9 spectral limbs. It felt demonic, yet the core of your power is blindingly pure. And that final technique, that was no holy art, nor was it a curse of the underworld. It was a craft of immense precision. What is it? They stared at him, 3 beings of divine might, their questions hanging in the still air. One full of awe, one of suspicion, one of intense curiosity. They were all looking to him for answers he didn't have. Naruto slowly pushed himself to his feet, his joints aching. He looked from Hestia's frightened face to Aqua's petulant pout to Gabriel's calculating gaze. He was tired. He was lost. His world had been torn away from him, and he was stranded in an unknown reality with 3 goddesses and a captured piece of anti-life. He opened his hand, looking at the silent, black orb. "It's contained," he said, his voice raspy. For now, he pocketed the sphere and let out a long, weary breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. The hero of the 4th Great Ninja War, the savior of the world. The child of prophecy. None of that mattered here. He looked at the 3 powerful, displaced beings before him, and for the first time, he spoke to them not as a warrior, but as a person. "Is everyone okay?" Quote. The simple, human question cut through their divine shock, grounding them in the strange, silent twilight of their new reality. They were not okay, and by the looks of it, None of them were going home anytime soon. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Hearth of Worlds. Weeks bled into one another in the tranquil twilight of the pocket dimension. The initial shock and terror of their displacement slowly gave way to a fragile, unspoken truce, which in turn softened into a strange, almost domestic routine. The passage of time was marked not by sun or moon, for there was only a perpetual, gentle dusk, but by the progress of the house. It was Hestia's idea. On the third day, after the adrenaline had faded and the true, crushing weight of their isolation had begun to set in, she had marched up to Naruto, her tiny fists clenched with a desperate resolve. "We need a home," she had declared, her crimson eyes shimmering. "A real home, with a hearth, a place to be a family." Naruto, who had spent his entire life chasing that very concept, couldn't have agreed more. So they built, or rather, Naruto built, and Hestia supervised with the fervent passion of a master architect designing her magnum opus. She'd chosen a spot on a gentle rise overlooking the serene, mirror-like lake. From there, they could see the entire valley, a panorama of jade green hills and silver-barked trees. "The foundation needs to be strong, Naruto-kun. It's the most important part of any home," she would chirp, pointing a small finger at a support beam. Naruto, his forehead beaded with sweat, would just grin and nod. "Got it, boss." He worked with a quiet, relentless efficiency that left the goddesses dumbfounded. Dozens of his shadow clones swarmed the construction site. Some felled the strange, silver-leafed trees with precise, chakra-honed axe swings. Others planed the logs into smooth, perfect lumber. A few more, under Hestia's exacting gaze, raised the walls and fit the joints with a craftsman's care. The original Naruto often sat nearby, whittling pegs or sketching out designs in the dirt, a placid look on his face that belied the monumental amount of chakra he was commanding. Hestia found a new purpose. Her divine nature, the essence of the hearth and home, resonated with the act of creation. She couldn't lift the heavy logs, but when a joint wouldn't quite fit, a soft, warm glow would emanate from her hands, and the wood would seem to warp ever so slightly, settling into a perfect, seamless connection. She was the soul of the project, infusing the raw materials with a sense of warmth and belonging. Aqua, meanwhile, had declared herself the director of aesthetics and hydration. This mostly involved her lounging by the lake, occasionally using her DxD power to create a shimmering rainbow that arced perfectly over the construction site. "See," she'd announce proudly to anyone who would listen, "my divine presence beautifies our surroundings. You should all be more grateful. And someone fetch me a drink." This supervising is exhausting. Her demands were usually met by a silent shadow clone that would appear, hand her a cup of fresh lake water, and then vanish. Aqua would grumble about the lack of wine but would drink it anyway, her contributions otherwise limited to purifying the lake to an absurd level of clarity and complaining about the quality of the fish Naruto's clones caught for their meals. Gabriel remained an enigma. She rarely participated in the construction, but she was a constant presence. She would often sit atop the highest hill, her 12 wings folded neatly, a silent, beautiful sentinel watching over them. Her violet eyes would follow Naruto, a complex mixture of curiosity and caution in her gaze. She saw the raw, almost terrifying power he wielded so casually, the army of clones, the lingering scent of the Nine Tails' immense chakra, but she also saw him patiently listening to Hestia's endless stream of instructions. Saw him hand a complaining Aqua a perfectly cooked fish without a word of reproach. He was a paradox she couldn't reconcile, a being with the power to shatter mountains who spent his days building a simple wooden house. The house grew, a strong foundation, sturdy walls, and a gently sloped roof. It wasn't the grandest structure, but it was solid. It had integrity. It felt real. Hestia had insisted on a large central room with a wide, stone-lined fireplace. "The hearth is the heart," she'd said, her voice filled with a reverence that made the statement feel like an undeniable truth. One afternoon, as Naruto hammered the final peg into a roof beam, Hestia bounced on the balls of her feet below, clapping her hands. "It's perfect, Naruto-kun. It's our home, our hearth." He hopped down, landing silently beside her. He looked at the simple, strong house, then at her beaming face. "Yeah," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his own. "It is." Hestia's face flushed with pleasure. She launched herself at him, wrapping her small arms around his waist in a fierce hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're the best familia captain ever. Naruto stiffened for a second, still unused to such casual, heartfelt affection. Before patting her head awkwardly. We all built it, Hestia. Nonsense. You did all the work. She chirped, her cheek pressed against his orange jacket. You're strong, and reliable. And you listen to me. I couldn't have asked for a better first child. From the lake, Aqua's voice drifted up. Are you two done being mushy? I'm starving, and I swear, if it's that bland silver fish again, I am going to cry. A goddess of my stature requires a more refined diet. Naruto chuckled, gently detaching Hestia. All right, I'll see what else I can find. A shadow clone that was weaving a grass mat by the door dissipated in a puff of smoke, the memory and intention flowing back to him. The main Naruto's eyes refocused. There's a patch of sweet, purple berries over the next hill. I'll go grab some. As he walked away, Hestia watched him go, her expression one of pure adoration. Gabriel, who had been observing from the porch, let a small, almost imperceptible smile touch her lips. The little hearth goddess had found her champion. That night, a fragile peace settled over the hearth. A fire crackled merrily in the fireplace Hestia had insisted they light, its warmth pushing back the perpetual twilight chill. They sat at a rough-hewn wooden table Naruto's clones had finished that afternoon. He had returned with not only berries but also a large, bird-like creature he'd managed to hunt. Roasted over the fire, it was a marked improvement over the fish, a fact even Aqua grudgingly admitted after her third helping. Hestia chattered happily about her plans for the garden. Aqua boasted about how her divine purification of the lake was probably the reason the bird tasted so good. Naruto ate in a comfortable silence, content to just listen to the noise. It felt right. It felt like the loud, chaotic dinners at Ichiraku, a feeling he hadn't realized how much he'd missed. Gabriel, as usual, was quiet. She ate with a delicate grace, but her eyes kept drifting from the fire to Naruto. Then to the other goddesses. She was studying their fledgling family, this impossible assembly of a mortal ninja, a forgotten Olympian, and a notoriously problematic archpriest. It defied all logic, all order, and yet, it worked. After dinner, Aqua declared herself too full to move and promptly fell asleep at the table, a small bubble of drool forming at the corner of her mouth. Hestia began humming as she cleared the wooden plates, her happiness filling the small house with a tangible warmth. Naruto stood, stretching his arms over his head. Gonna get some air, he announced. Walking towards the door, he found himself drawn to the lake, its surface a perfect sheet of obsidian reflecting the unfamiliar stars. The air was cool and clean. He sat at the water's edge, skipping a flat stone across the surface. It bounced 7 times before sinking without a ripple. He thought of Konoha, of his friends, of the life that had been stolen from him. The ache was still there, a dull throb beneath the surface of this new peace. He had a home now, a hearth, and even the beginnings of a strange, dysfunctional family. But it wasn't his home. It is beautiful here, a soft voice said behind him. He didn't startle. He had sensed her approach. He turned his head to see Gabriel standing a few feet away, her golden hair catching the starlight, her white robes seeming to glow in the twilight. She moved with a silent grace, her bare feet making no sound on the soft grass. Yeah, it is, Naruto agreed, turning his gaze back to the lake. She came to sit beside him. A respectful distance between them. For a long time, they just sat in silence, a shared quiet that was comfortable rather than awkward. She was nothing like the boisterous Aqua or the effusive Hestia. She had a stillness about her, an ancient calm that Naruto found himself appreciating. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and melodic. I have watched you for weeks, Naruto Uzumaki. I have seen you command an army of yourself. I have seen you wield a power that feels like a caged star. I have seen you fight a creature of the void. And I have seen you patiently build a house for a goddess who has nothing. And indulge the whims of another who has too much. She turned to face him, her violet eyes serious. I do not understand you. In heaven, power is tied to station, to purpose, to divine mandate. Your power seems personal. It is a part of you, like a limb. What is your purpose? What is it you fight for? Naruto thought for a moment, watching the stars swim in the lake's reflection. It was the same question he'd been asking himself. What was his purpose, now that the war was won? I used to fight for acknowledgement, he said, his voice quiet but clear. I wanted everyone to see me, to stop looking at me like I was a monster or a mistake. I wanted to be Hokage. He picked up another stone, feeling its smooth, cool weight in his palm. I fought to protect my friends, my home. To bring my best friend back from the dark. He tossed the stone. It skipped 9 times. I guess. I just fought to keep my promises. And have you? She asked. Yeah, I think so, he said. The world is at peace. My friends are safe. Everyone finally sees me. He paused, a hint of the old loneliness creeping into his voice. The strange thing is, now that I have it all, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with it. Gabriel was silent for a long moment, processing his words. This wasn't the answer of a soldier or a king. It was the answer of a man. A profoundly powerful man who was, at his core, simply looking for his place. All her celestial knowledge, her millennia of understanding divine hierarchies and cosmic laws, gave her no framework for this. He turned to her then, his ocean blue eyes meeting her violet ones. There was no artifice in his gaze, no challenge. Just a simple, direct curiosity. He wasn't looking at a seraph of heaven, a being of immense power and authority. He was just looking at her. What about you? He asked. You seem sad. The question was so unexpected, so startlingly direct, that it was like a physical blow. Gabriel's perfect composure fractured. Her wings gave a single, involuntary flutter. Sad. She was an archangel. The seraph Gabriel, a pillar of heaven. Her existence was one of duty, of grace, of divine perfection. Emotions like sadness were messy, mortal afflictions. They were beneath her station. And yet, he wasn't wrong. I am not sad, she said, but the words felt like a lie on her tongue. I am merely displaced. My place is in the high heavens, assisting my brother Michael in the administration of the celestial realms. Naruto just looked at her, his expression unwavering. He wasn't buying it. That's your job, he said simply. I didn't ask what your job is. I asked if you're happy. The blunt, human question shattered her defenses. Happy. Was she happy? Filing reports on angelic choirs, mediating disputes between lower-ranking powers. Endlessly upholding a rigid dogma that left no room for error or emotion. She had grace, she had power, she had status. But happiness. The concept felt alien, a word from a language she had long forgotten. Her gaze dropped to her hands, which were clenched in her lap. I do not know, she confessed, the admission a whisper that seemed to carry the weight of eons. It is not a question I have ever considered. Naruto's expression softened with an empathy that was far more disarming than any display of power. He saw it then, the gilded cage, the loneliness of the pedestal. It was a different kind of isolation from his own, but it was isolation all the same. Well, he said, a small, kind smile touching his lips. Maybe this is a good chance to figure it out. A strange warmth bloomed in Gabriel's chest. A feeling so foreign it was almost alarming. It wasn't the holy light of heaven. It was something else. Something human. For the first time, someone had looked past the seraph, past the 12 wings and the divine power, and had simply asked about her. Before she could find the words to respond, reality tore open. A searing, golden light erupted in the sky above the valley. So bright it bleached the twilight and cast long, sharp shadows. A sound followed, not of an explosion, but of 1,000 trumpets blaring a single, triumphant, and utterly arrogant chord. The very air grew heavy, charged with a holy power that was immense, orderly, and suffocatingly rigid. Naruto was on his feet in an instant, his body coiled with readiness. Gabriel stood as well, her face a mask of shock and dawning dread. Back at the house, Hestia and a now wide-awake Aqua stumbled outside, shielding their eyes. A perfect circle of golden light formed in the sky, a portal. From it, a squadron of figures descended. They were angels, clad in ornate, silver and gold armor, their faces severe and beautiful. Each had multiple pairs of brilliant white wings. They moved with military precision, forming a perfect semicircle in the air before them, their spears of light held at the ready. At their head floated a commander, an angel with 6 wings whose presence dwarfed the others. His armor was more intricate. His golden hair was braided with silver wire, and his face was a portrait of zealous righteousness. His eyes, burning with a cold, holy fire, swept over the valley, dismissing the house. Dismissing Hestia and Aqua, before landing on Gabriel. His expression hardened when he saw Naruto standing beside her. "Sister," the commander's voice boomed, resonant and utterly devoid of warmth. "Your truancy is at an end. By the order of the High Council, you are to return to the 7th heaven at once." Gabriel's face paled. "Uriel," she breathed. Uriel's gaze slid to Naruto, and his lip curled in open disgust. "You have been keeping company with a mortal," he said, his tone dripping with contempt. He could sense the lingering traces of Kurama's chakra, a scent that was anathema to him. Worse, one tainted by demonic filth. "Have you fallen so far, Gabriel?" Aqua, bristling at the commander's dismissive attitude, puffed out her chest. "Hey, who do you think you are? Show some respect. You are in the presence of the goddess Aqua, and the goddess Hestia, and him," she finished, gesturing vaguely at Naruto. Uriel didn't even grant her a glance. A disgraced RTY goddess whose followers have all but forgotten her, and a forgotten hearth deity clinging to a mortal for relevance, he sneered, his words like shards of ice. "Your presence is an irrelevance." Aqua's jaw dropped, and she began to sputter in incoherent rage. Hestia flinched as if struck, wrapping her arms around herself. Naruto's easy-going demeanor vanished. His eyes narrowed, and the air around him grew still. The casual insult to Hestia and Aqua had been a mistake. Gabriel stepped forward, her regal authority returning. "Uriel, that is enough. This was not my doing. We were all pulled from our worlds by a force we do not understand. This mortal, Naruto Uzumaki, saved us. Saved you." Uriel scoffed, his gaze locking onto Naruto again. "Are contaminated you. The Father's law is clear. Celestial beings are not to co-mingle with lesser creatures, let alone become entangled in their profane energies. Your absence has caused disarray. Your duties are paramount. We are here to escort you home." He gestured, and 2 of the armored angels began to descend, their intent clear. They were not asking. Gabriel was frozen, a battle raging within her. Millennia of duty, of obedience, of her very identity as a seraph, screamed at her to comply. It was the logical, correct thing to do. But then she looked at Naruto's back. He hadn't moved, but his posture had shifted. He was a wall, and she thought of his question by the lake. "Are you happy? Returning to heaven? Returning to the endless, gilded cage of duty?" The answer was a resounding, terrifying no. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking slightly. But Uriel was not a being who countenanced hesitation. "Your feelings are irrelevant, sister. Your duty is absolute." The 2 angels continued their descent, their hands outstretched to take her arms. They never reached her. Naruto moved. It wasn't a flash of speed, not a teleportation. One moment he was beside the lake, the next he was standing directly in front of Gabriel, his back to her, facing the angelic squadron. He didn't power up. He didn't summon a Rasengan. He just stood there. But his presence, which had been as calm as the lake, had become a physical force. The air grew thick, heavy, like the pressure before a hurricane. The ground beneath his feet spider-webbed with tiny cracks. The ambient energy of the dimension, the soft hum they had grown used to, now bowed to him, swirling around him in a visible, silent vortex. It was the sheer, unadulterated weight of his will, backed by a chakra reserve so vast it was functionally limitless. The 2 descending angels stopped dead. Their advance halted not by a barrier, but by a pressure that made their wings tremble and their lungs ache. The entire angelic squadron stirred, their perfect formation disrupted. They gripped their spears tighter, their righteous certainty faltering in the face of this mortal's suffocating presence. Uriel's eyes widened in shock. He could feel it, the raw, untamed power that dwarfed his own, dwarfed that of his entire squadron combined. It wasn't holy, it wasn't demonic. It was something else entirely. It was elemental. It was vital. It was the power of life itself, focused into a single, immovable point. Naruto raised his head, his blue eyes meeting Uriel's burning gaze across the distance. His voice was not loud. It was a low, steady rumble that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. "She'll go if she wants to," he said, the words clear and final. You're not taking her anywhere. The declaration hung in the air, an unbreakable law. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. Gabriel stared at his back. At this man who had known her for mere weeks, now standing against the might of heaven itself, not to claim her, but to defend her choice. The warmth she had felt by the lake bloomed into a raging fire in her chest. It was courage, it was loyalty, it was a feeling she had only ever read about in the epics of mortal heroes. Her hesitation vanished, replaced by a crystalline certainty. She took a step forward, standing beside Naruto, facing her celestial brother. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer shaking. It was as clear and strong as a silver bell. I am staying, Uriel. Uriel stared, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He looked from Gabriel's defiant face to the immovable mortal beside her. He saw this not as a choice, but as a corruption, a great betrayal. He had come to retrieve a wayward seraph, and had found a rebellion. He was powerful, but he was not a fool. He could feel the lethal promise coiled in Naruto's stillness. To press the attack now would be suicide for his entire squadron. His handsome face twisted into a snarl of righteous anger. You choose this filth over your sacred duty. You would abandon your station F. Or a mortal and his collection of forgotten goddesses. I choose freedom, Gabriel replied, her voice unwavering. I choose a home. Uriel's gaze burned with cold fire. He raised a hand, and his squadron pulled back, reforming their ranks behind him. So be it, he hissed, his voice echoing with celestial power. You have made your choice, fallen sister. You have aligned yourself with an anomaly, and turned your back on the divine order. Heaven will not forget this slight. The High Council will be informed. With a final, hateful glare at Naruto, Uriel and his squadron were enveloped in the golden light. The sound of trumpets blared one last, discordant note, and the portal snapped shut, plunging the valley back into its soft, familiar twilight. Silence descended, heavier and more profound than before. Aqua finally found her voice. He called me a party goddess. The nerve. I am a beautiful, revered goddess of water. I demand an apology. Hestia rushed to Naruto's side, grabbing his arm. That was amazing, Naruto-kun. You were so cool. You just stood there and went whoosh and they all got scared. Naruto's shoulders slumped, the immense pressure he was emitting vanishing as if it had never been. He let out a long breath, a plume of steam in the cool air. He had faced down gods and monsters, but political maneuvering with heaven was a new, and deeply unwelcome, headache. He turned to look at Gabriel. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright, alight with a fire he hadn't seen before. She looked free. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but filled with a depth of gratitude that resonated more than any angelic choir. Naruto just gave her a small, tired smile. That's what family's for, right? He looked at the three of them, a terrified but resolute Hestia, a fuming and indignant Aqua, and a liberated, grateful Gabriel. Then he looked back at the house they had built together. Their hearth. It was more than just wood and stone now. It was a declaration, a fortress. It was a home they had just defended. Together. The ache of his lost world was still there, but for the first time, it was balanced by the fierce, protective warmth of a new one. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Echo of Nothingness. The confrontation with Uriel left a strange quiet in its wake. It was not the peaceful silence of their valley, but a heavy, charged stillness, thick with unspoken questions. Gabriel had chosen them, chosen him, over heaven itself. The act was a stone dropped into the placid waters of their existence, and the ripples were only now beginning to spread. The immediate aftermath was a study in contrasts. Hestia, buzzing with vicarious victory, followed Naruto around, recounting his cool standoff with the angels in breathless detail. Aqua, having recovered from the insult of being called a party goddess, was now loudly proclaiming that the angels had clearly fled because they sensed her own immense, latent divine power and were wise enough not to provoke her. Gabriel, however, was quieter than ever, the initial fire of her defiance banking into a smoldering, contemplative ember. She had severed a bond that had defined her for millennia, and the phantom AC. Heat of that amputation was just beginning to set in. Naruto recognized the look in her eyes. It was the look of a soldier after a battle that changes everything. Victory felt hollow, the path forward uncertain. He knew they couldn't afford to drift. The Void Hound was a predator. Uriel was a political threat. They were stranded, but they were not safe. They were a family now, and a family had to be able to protect itself. That's why he started the training. No, no, no. Aim for the tree, not the mountain. Naruto yelled, ducking as a compressed orb of brilliant blue energy, crackling with holy power, screamed past his head and slammed into a distant hillside with a deafening boom. The explosion sent a shower of rock and dirt into the air half a mile away. Aqua stood with her hands on her hips, a triumphant look on her face. See, look at that power. Did you see the size of that explosion? Truly fitting for a goddess of my caliber. You should be praising me more. I asked you to hit the big silver tree 50 feet in front of you, Naruto said, pointing to the completely untouched plant. A shadow clone standing beside the target tree gave him a weary thumbs up before vanishing in a puff of smoke. You missed. By about 3,000 feet. Details. Details. Aqua huffed, waving a dismissive hand. It was a warning shot. To show any other potential enemies the folly of messing with the great Aqua. Naruto sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Teaching Aqua control was like trying to teach a hurricane to be a gentle breeze. Her power was immense, instinctual, and utterly without discipline. She didn't aim so much as gesture vaguely in a direction and unleash chaos. A few yards away, Hestia was having a different kind of trouble. Come on, Hestia, focus, another Naruto clone encouraged gently. You said your blessing strengthens your familia, right? Try to project it. Think of it like a warm blanket of power. Wrap it around me. Hestia stood with her eyes screwed shut, her little hands glowing with a soft orange-white light. She was trembling with effort. I'm trying, Naruto-kun. But it's never worked like this before. My blessing only works when I update a status, when I touch my children's backs. Forget how it used to work. We're in a new place, with new rules. Just feel it, the warmth, the feeling you get when you think about keeping us safe. Push that feeling out, the clone instructed. Hestia let out a small squeak of effort. A faint shimmer of warmth, like heat haze, emanated from her, extending about 3 inches before fizzling out. She slumped, panting. It's no use. I can't do it. I'm not a combat goddess. You don't have to be, the clone said patiently. You're our support, the best support there is. We'll get there. The most promising, and most challenging sparring partner was Gabriel. They stood in a wide, grassy clearing, the twilight air still and cool. Your technique is brutish, Naruto Uzumaki, Gabriel stated, her tone analytical, not insulting. She held a spear of pure, golden light, its point humming with celestial energy. You rely on overwhelming force and unpredictable numbers. Works, doesn't it? Naruto replied with a grin, settling into his familiar taijutsu stance. Okay, no clones this time, just you and me. Try to land a hit. A foolish proposition, she said, but her wings flared slightly in anticipation. She moved, and she was breathtaking. Gabriel flowed like water, her spear an extension of her grace, a blur of golden light that carved intricate, deadly patterns in the air. Each thrust was perfect, each parry a model of efficiency. It was the combat style of a being who had trained for centuries, a beautiful, deadly dance. Naruto, by contrast, was a storm. He didn't dance, he exploded. He ducked under a thrust that would have decapitated a lesser man, the wind of its passage stirring his hair. He deflected a sweeping strike with the reinforced bracer on his forearm, the impact sending a shockwave through the ground. He was all instinct and sharp, angular movements. He wasn't trying to match her grace, he was disrupting it. He'd leap in, forcing a close quarters exchange, then suddenly drop back, throwing a handful of dirt in her face, a classic academy trick that made her sputter in indignation. He'd feint a punch and go for a leg sweep. He moved in a way that defied her tactical predictions, his rhythm chaotic and utterly his own. After several minutes of furious exchange, he saw an opening. She lunged, her spear aimed for his heart in a textbook perfect strike. Instead of parrying, Naruto dropped, sliding under the spear, and popped up on the other side, inside her guard. Before she could react, he tapped her lightly on the forehead with his index and middle fingers. Gotcha, he said, grinning. Gabriel froze, the golden spear dissolving in her hand. A faint blush colored her cheeks. She had been so focused on the grand sweep of battle, on the perfect form of her attack, that she had completely overlooked the simple, pragmatic trick. That was undignified, she said, though there was no heat in her words. Only a grudging respect. Winning is better than being dignified, Naruto countered, offering her a hand up. She took it, his grip warm and solid. You're thinking too much about the right way to fight. Sometimes, you just gotta do what works. As she stood, their eyes met. In that moment, there was a new understanding. He wasn't just a brute with limitless power. He was a warrior, a survivor, with an instinct for combat that was as sharp as any celestial blade. And he was trying to share that instinct with them. Their training was interrupted when Naruto suddenly went still, his head cocked. Hold on. The good humor vanished from his face, replaced by a deep, unsettling seriousness. He walked away from the training grounds, heading toward a barren clearing a half-mile from their house. The others followed, their curiosity piqued by his sudden change in mood. He had chosen this spot for a reason. It was far enough away that any accidents wouldn't damage their home. On the ground, he had already painted a massive, complex fuinjutsu array. A circular barrier of interlocking kanji. He stopped in the center of the circle. Stay back, he warned, his voice grim. This could get ugly. Hestia clutched Aqua's arm, her eyes wide with worry. Gabriel watched intently, sensing his purpose. Naruto took a deep breath and reached into the pouch at his waist, pulling out the small, black orb he had taken from the Void Hound. It felt cold, a patch of absolute zero in the warm air, and seemed to drink the ambient light. Placing the orb on the ground, he kneeled, forming a new series of hand seals. Sealing Jutsu. Release. The characters on the orb flared with a violet light, and then cracked. A wave of oppressive silence washed over them, and from the broken sphere, the Void Hound began to coalesce once more. Shadowy tendrils snaked out, pulling the formless void into its canine shape. It grew rapidly, its featureless head turning, its silent, psychic snarl echoing in their minds. It was just as terrifying as it had been in the Nexus. But Naruto didn't move to attack. He simply rose to his feet, dropped into a meditative pose, and closed his eyes. The orange pigmentation of Sage Mode flowed over his eyelids. Naruto-kun, what are you doing? Hestia cried out in panic. The hound, sensing the monumental life force before it, lunged. It slammed into an invisible wall, the barrier of the fuinjutsu array, which flared to life, holding the creature at bay. It clawed and bit at the glowing kanji, its void claws causing the seals to sizzle and smoke, but they held. Naruto ignored it. He extended his senses, not his chakra, but his connection to nature itself. He didn't try to feel the creature's life force, he knew it had none. Instead, he tried to feel the space around it. He focused on the whole it represented, the way it be. And tore at the fabric of their dimension. He traced the lines of that wrongness, following the metaphysical tear back to its source. He found a thread, a slender, barely perceptible connection leading out of their pocket dimension, out into the screaming chaos of the Nexus, and then, beyond. He pushed his consciousness along that thread, and for a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, he felt it. He was no longer in the valley. He was adrift in an infinite, cold, and silent black. Before him, a galaxy, a spiral of a billion stars and suns, was slowly, inexorably being consumed. A tide of utter blackness was washing over it, and as the stars were touched by the void, their light didn't explode. It was simply extinguished, like candles being snuffed out one by one. Then, he felt a consciousness. It was not a mind in any way he understood. It was a vast, ancient, and tired intellect, as large as a universe and as cold as the space between them. It radiated a single, overwhelming emotion, a profound, philosophical desire for everything to simply stop. The pain of existence, the noise of life, the pointless struggle of creation, it saw it all as a flaw, a cosmic mistake. And it saw itself as the cure. A single word whispered through his mind, a name of dreadful weight, formed from the silence itself. Erebos. The vision shattered. Naruto gasped, his eyes snapping open, his connection severed. He stumbled back, a cold sweat on his brow, the sheer scale of that consciousness threatening to overwhelm him. The fuinjutsu barrier, under the hound's relentless assault and weakened by Naruto's lapse in concentration. Finally gave way. It shattered with a sound like breaking glass. The Void Hound, free and enraged, launched itself directly at the distracted Naruto. Gabriel's wings flared. Naruto. She was too far away. But a new figure had already appeared. It wasn't a blur of motion. It was a deepening of shadow. A patch of ground between Naruto and the hound darkened, and from that shadow, a man rose as if from black water. He was tall and lean, clad in a suit of interlocking black plate armor that seemed forged from solidified night. It had no shine, no reflection, only a matte texture that devoured the light. His helmet was a featureless barbet, leaving only his mouth and jaw exposed, which were set in a calm, almost serene line. He held a greatsword of the same black, non-reflective material. The Void Hound, about to pounce on Naruto, froze. It lowered its head and made a soft, psychic whimper, like a dog greeting its master. The armored figure, the Silent Knight, reached out and gently stroked the hound's featureless head. "Hush now, little Echo," he said, his voice a calm, cultured baritone. It was not the voice of a monster. It was the voice of a scholar, or a priest. "Your purpose is served." He turned his faceless helmet toward Naruto's group. His gaze passed over a terrified Hestia and a shocked Aqua, lingered for a moment on Gabriel's celestial form, and then settled on Naruto. "The anomaly," the knight said, his voice resonating with a strange lack of emotion. "The one who resonates with the noise of life so loudly. My master was curious. He does not often find new notes in the cacophony." Naruto pushed himself to his feet, his mind still reeling from the vision, but his body ready for battle. "Who are you?" "I am a servant of the final piece," the knight replied calmly. "A nullsworn of Lord Erebos. And I am here to offer you liberation." His gaze flicked to the goddesses. "Existence is a burden. Divinity, a curse of eternal suffering. We offer a merciful end. A return to the perfect, silent grace of nothingness." Gabriel took a step forward, her face a mask of cold fury. "Blasphemy. The light of creation is a gift. Life is sacred." She raised her hand, and a dozen spears of brilliant, holy light formed around her, crackling with righteous power. With a sharp cry, she launched them at the knight. The knight didn't move. He didn't raise a shield. He simply stood there. As Gabriel's spears entered a 10-foot radius around him, they began to waver. Their light dimmed, their forms thinned, and they dissolved into harmless motes of golden dust, vanishing completely before they even reached his armor. Gabriel gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. "My light, it's gone." "Your light is just another form of noise," the knight said dispassionately. "My master's grace silences all such distractions." Hestia, seeing Naruto and Gabriel threatened, found a spark of courage. "Get away from them," she yelled. She thrust her hands forward, and a wave of her divine warmth, the very essence of the hearth, flowed toward the knight. It wasn't an attack, but a wave of pure, protective intent. The knight took a single step forward, into the wave. The warmth vanished around him, his personal bubble of nullity acting as a perfect void. He walked through her power as if it were nothing more than a change in the air. A pointless gesture from a forgotten flame. "You, little goddess, will be the first to receive the gift of silence." He moved, his speed utterly deceptive. He wasn't just fast, he seemed to shorten the distance between them. Flowing across the ground like a shadow, he was before Hestia in an instant, his greatsword raised, its black edge promising not pain, but simple erasure. Hestia froze, a scream caught in her throat. "Get away from her." The shriek was not from Naruto or Gabriel. It was from Aqua. Her face was twisted in a mask of genuine, protective fury. The knight threatening her new, tiny, worshipper Ash housemate had finally pushed her past her fear and into a rage. She thrust her hands forward, not bothering to aim a god's blow. Sacred create water. It wasn't a focused attack. It was a deluge, a tidal wave of shimmering, impossibly clear water erupted from thin air, crashing down toward the knight. He raised a hand, expecting his nullification aura to simply erase it. But something different happened. The water did begin to dissipate as it entered his aura, but it was too much, too pure. It wasn't just water infused with holy power, it was the conceptual opposite of his void. It was life, creation, and purity made manifest. The water that reached his armor didn't bounce off. It sizzled. Corrosive steam erupted from his body, and the knight let out his first sound of discomfort, a sharp, surprised hiss. The black, void-forged armor began to smoke and corrode where the purest droplets touched it. Purity. Such a vulgar, noisy concept, the knight grunted, taking a step back, the greatsword momentarily forgotten. That was all the opening Naruto needed. His mind was crystal clear now. He understood. It wasn't about power levels. It was about concepts. Void versus life. Nothingness versus creation. And Aqua, in her blind, idiotic fury, had just shown him the way. He shot forward, a blur of orange. The knight, recovering, swung his greatsword in a deadly arc. Naruto slid under it, his hand already forming a Rasengan. But this was different. He poured sage energy into it, the raw life force of the world, but he didn't stop there. He pushed his own vital essence, the fiery spark of his Uzumaki lineage, into the spinning sphere. Then he did the impossible. He added a shape transformation. Hundreds of microscopic blades of pure nature energy erupted from the sphere. It was a Rasenshuriken, but it wasn't made of wind that cut. It was made of life that undid death. A life force Rasenshuriken. The sound it made was not the screeching of wind, but a high-pitched, harmonious chime, like 1,000 tiny bells. It glowed with a brilliant, verdant light. You like silence so much. Naruto roared, slamming the jutsu into the knight's chest. Then have some of this. The impact was absolute. There was no explosion of force, no shockwave. There was a wave of overwhelming, vibrant life. The knight's nullification aura was not pierced or broken, it was filled. Overwhelmed. The black armor did not shatter. It flaked away like dried mud, undone by the conceptual assault. The knight himself was thrown backward, tumbling end over end, his body now exposed in a simple black undersuit. He landed in a heap, his greatsword clattering to the ground beside him. Naruto was on him in a flash, a kunai at his throat. Talk, now. The silent knight coughed, a trickle of black ichor leaking from his mouth. He looked up, and for the first time, Naruto could see his eyes through the helmet's slit. They were the flat, empty eyes of a zealot. A small, serene smile touched the knight's lips. He sees you now, anomaly. The knight whispered, his voice losing its strength. My master is no longer just curious. He is interested. Before Naruto could press him, the knight's body dissolved. It didn't burn or explode. It simply unraveled, turning into a cloud of black motes that were swept away on a non-existent wind, leaving nothing behind but his broken armor and sword, which quickly crumbled to dust. The clearing fell silent. The Void Hound had vanished along with its master. Aqua stood panting, the rage draining from her, leaving her pale and trembling. Did you see that? I did that. My sacred create water is super effective against emo knights. I'm amazing. I need a drink. Hestia was on the ground, shaking, tears streaming down her face. Gabriel was staring at the spot where her spears had dissolved. Her entire understanding of her own power fundamentally shaken. Naruto stood over the dust of the knight's armor, his new Rasenshuriken having faded from his hand. He had won. They had survived, but the victory felt like a prelude to a much larger war. The knight's final words echoed in his mind, a chilling promise that sent a shiver down his spine despite the warmth of his own overflowing life force. He is interested. The game had changed. They were no longer just hiding. They were a target. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Crisis of Heart. The dust of the silent night settled. But the silence he left behind was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The victory, so desperately won, did not bring celebration. It brought fear. The tangible proof of an enemy who could not be simply overpowered. Whose philosophy was as much a weapon as his sword, had poisoned the tranquility of their pocket dimension. The twilight sky seemed a little darker, the silver trees alit. More like skeletal fingers reaching for them. The hearth, their proud creation, felt less like a fortress and more like a fragile raft in an ocean of encroaching darkness. Aqua was the first to break. After a brief, manic period of boasting about her super effective water, the adrenaline crash hit her like a physical blow. She collapsed onto the living room floor, curled into a ball, and began to wail. He was so scary, and his armor was all black and depressing. What if more of them come? What if they don't have a weakness to my amazing holy water? We're all gonna be turned into nothing. I'm too beautiful and important to be turned into nothing. Her sobs were loud, theatrical, and utterly genuine. Hestia tried to comfort her, patting her back with a trembling hand, but her own fear was a cold knot in her stomach. During the fight, she had been useless. Worse than useless, she had been a target, a liability that had nearly gotten everyone killed. The knight had walked through her divine power as if it were a mild breeze. He had dismissed her as a forgotten flame. The words echoed in her mind, each one a sharp jab at her deepest insecurities. She was a goddess of the hearth, a nurturer. What good was that against an enemy who wanted to extinguish all warmth from the universe? Gabriel was the most deeply shaken. She stood on the porch, staring at her own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. For millennia, her identity had been inextricably linked to her power. She was Gabriel, the seraph, wielder of God's holy light. Her light was a symbol of order, of purity, of heaven's unassailable might. And the silent night had undone it. He hadn't blocked it or overpowered it, he had simply negated it, dismissed it as noise. If her power, the very core of her being, was meaningless against this new threat, then what was she? The question spiraled in her mind, a vortex of existential dread that threatened to pull her under. Her faith in her own purpose, a bedrock she had stood upon for eons, was cracking. Naruto felt their collective despair like a physical weight. He was the anchor, the pillar. He couldn't afford to show the cold dread that was coiling in his own gut. The vision of Erebos, the galaxy being snuffed out, was seared into his memory. This was a threat on a scale that made Kaguya seem like a regional dispute. He had won the battle, but the knight's calm, fanatical certainty had unnerved him more than any monstrous rage. They weren't fighting for territory or power. They were fighting for the right to exist. He moved with a quiet purpose, his actions a bulwark against the encroaching fear. He reinforced the Fuinjutsu seals around their valley, weaving new layers of detection and defense into the very fabric of the dimension. His clones patrolled the borders, silent sentinels against a threat that could come from anywhere. He hunted, he cooked, he maintained the routine of their lives, a steady, rhythmic presence against the chaos of their emotions. But it wasn't enough. The emotional wounds were festering. The first sign was the fire. One evening, a few days after the fight, Naruto noticed it. The flames in the hearth, usually a cheerful, roaring blaze under Hestia's influence, were low and listless. They gave off a weak, sputtering light and a pathetic amount of warmth. The entire house felt colder, a draft seeping in that had nothing to do with the wind. He found Hestia sitting on her bed, staring at the wall, her small shoulders slumped. The usual vibrant energy that radiated from her was gone, replaced by a dim, melancholic aura. "Hestia," he asked gently from the doorway. "Everything okay?" She didn't turn. "I'm useless, Naruto-kun," she whispered, her voice choked. "That's not true." "It is." She finally looked at him, her big crimson eyes swimming with tears. "Gabriel-san has her holy light, even if it didn't work on that one guy. Aqua-chan has her amazing water powers. You can do everything. What can I do?" I made the fire a little warmer. I tried to cheer everyone up. But when that monster came for me, all I could do was freeze and wait to die. I'm just a burden. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. It was the same word he had used to describe himself as a child, a label branded onto him by a village that feared him. He felt a pang of empathy so sharp it took his breath away. "My DxD power is to protect and nurture my familia," she continued, tears now rolling freely down her cheeks. "But I can't protect you. I can't even make the house feel warm anymore. What kind of hearth go? Am I if my own hearth is going cold?" She saw the way he and Gabriel had fought together, a whirlwind of chaotic grace. She saw the unspoken understanding that was growing between them, a bond forged in the crucible of combat. And her insecurity, her fear of being left behind, curdled into a painful, lonely jealousy. She wasn't jealous of Gabriel. She was jealous of her strength, of her ability to stand by his side as an equal. Naruto didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say, "You're not a burden." He walked into the room, pulled over a small wooden stool, and sat down in front of her. He didn't say anything for a long time, just letting the silence stretch, letting her feel his steady, patient presence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and soft. When I was a kid, he began. His eyes focused on a knot in the wooden floor. I was alone. Everyone in my village hated me, or they were scared of me. I was loud and obnoxious and pulled pranks all the time, just so people would look at me. Even a glare was better than being invisible. Hestia sniffled, her attention caught by the unexpected confession. I got put on a team with Sasuke and Sakura, he continued. Sasuke was a genius. He could do everything perfectly without even trying. Sakura was the smartest girl in the class. And I was the dead last. The idiot. The burden. On our first big mission, I froze. I was so scared, I couldn't move. Our sensei had to save me. I felt just like you feel right now. Useless. He looked up, and his blue eyes were clear, holding no pity, only a deep, profound understanding. Being strong isn't just about fighting. Hestia. Sasuke was strong, but his strength led him down a dark path for years. My strength comes from the people I want to protect. It's not mine alone. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an earnest whisper. You're right, you're not a combat goddess. You're not a shield, and you're not a sword. You know what you are. You're the reason we fight. You, the one who decided this place should be a home. You gathered us. You gave us a center. That fire in the other room. He gestured with his head. It's not just a fire. It's us. It's warm when you're happy, and it's cold when you're sad. Because you are the hearth, Hestia. Not just for the house. For all of us. He reached out, not to pat her head, but to gently wipe a tear from her cheek with his thumb. We're your familia. We're the swords. We're the shields. Your job is just to be the home we all come back to. And that's the most important job of all. The simple, heartfelt words were a dam breaking. Hestia let out a choked sob and launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest and crying out all her fear, her insecurity, and her loneliness. Naruto just held her, one hand stroking her hair, letting her release it all. It wasn't a hero comforting a goddess. It was one lonely soul telling another that they weren't alone anymore. The bond between them shifted. Her affection for him, once born of awe and dependency, was reforged in the fires of empathy. He wasn't just her strong, reliable captain anymore. He was the one who understood the ache in her heart. He was her home, just as much as she was his. As he held her, a flicker of light from the main room caught his eye. The fire in the hearth had just leapt up, burning brighter and warmer than ever before. Meanwhile, a different, quieter crisis was unfolding by the lake. Gabriel sat on the shore where she and Naruto had spoken, her bare feet submerged in the perfectly pure water Aqua had created. She stared at her reflection, at the image of a being of light and power. It felt like a mockery. It is a frightening thing, is it not? To question the very nature of your existence. The voice was calm, but carried a hint of a familiar, aristocratic drawl. Gabriel looked up to see Aqua standing there, holding two wooden cups. The water goddess wasn't wearing her usual haughty expression. Her face was subdued, her blue eyes holding a rare seriousness. She sat down next to Gabriel, handing her one of the cups. It was filled with the same clear, pure water from the lake. Gabriel took it automatically, surprised by the gesture. I did not think you capable of such introspection, she said, her voice flat. Aqua shrugged, swirling the water in her own cup. I spend most of my time demanding praise and avoiding work. It leaves a lot of time for thinking, she admitted with a wry twist of her lips. I saw your face during the fight. When your light vanished, it was the same face I made back in the Nexus. When my turn undead didn't work. She took a sip of water. It sucks, doesn't it? When the one thing you're supposed to be good at, the one thing that makes you you, turns out to be useless. Gabriel stared at her, stunned by the sudden, sharp insight from the ditzy goddess. You understand. Of course I understand, Aqua said, a flicker of her usual indignation returning. Back in my world, I was a guide for souls. A proper, respected goddess. Then I got dragged into a fantasy world with a shut-in neat, and suddenly I was just the party's clumsy archpriest. My holy magic was great against undead, but pretty useless against giant toads. I became the party trick. The useful in specific situations goddess. She sighed dramatically. It was the ultimate humiliation. Gabriel found herself listening, captivated. She had dismissed Aqua as a noisy, selfish child. But in this moment, she saw something else. A goddess who had already fallen from her pedestal and had, somehow, learned to live with it. "So what did you do?" Gabriel asked, her voice barely a whisper. Aqua drained her cup and looked out at the twilight sky. "I cried. A lot. I drank. A lot. I complained that it wasn't fair. But eventually, you just get on with it." She looked at Gabriel, her blue eyes surprisingly clear. "You find other things you're good at. Like, it turns out, my purification powers are ridiculously strong. Strong enough to corrode void armor, apparently. Who knew? And I'm great at party tricks. Everyone loves my nature's beauty." She leaned in, her expression earnest. "Look, angel girl, your light might not work on Mr. Tall, dark and gloomy. So what? You've got wings. You can fly super fast. You've got that light spear. You're strong. Maybe you're not the ultimate weapon of heaven against this enemy. Maybe against this enemy, you're just a really, really good fighter who can fly. Is that so bad?" The logic was so simple, so infuriatingly pragmatic, it was like a splash of cold water. Gabriel had been so trapped in the why was her power failing, what did it mean for her identity, that she had failed to consider the what now. "Your purpose doesn't have to be some grand, cosmic thing," Aqua finished. A surprising wisdom in her tone. "Right now, our purpose is to not get erased by scary void people. And maybe, if we're lucky, find some decent wine in this dimension." Gabriel looked down at her cup, then back at Aqua. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time in days. "Perhaps you are not as much of a fool as you appear, Lady Aqua." Aqua beamed, puffing out her chest. "Of course not. I am a wise and benevolent goddess. Now, does this mean you'll praise me? I feel I've earned at least 3 good jobs, Aqua-samas, for that speech." Gabriel's smile widened into a soft laugh. The sound was as beautiful and unexpected as a star falling into the lake. "Good job, Aqua-sama." That night, the 4 of them gathered around the table for dinner. The mood was completely different. Hestia, her inner light rekindled, bustled about, serving a stew that was richer and more flavorful than anything they'd eaten before. The warmth from the hearth filled the room, a cozy, tangible presence. Aqua was regaling them with a highly exaggerated tale of her philosophical wisdom, demanding praise from everyone. Gabriel sat, not with her usual reserved stillness, but with a new lightness in her posture. She still had questions, she still had doubts, but the crushing weight on her soul had eased. She had found a new perspective, a new starting point, offered by the most unlikely of teachers. They were a mess, a traumatized ninja, a neurotic hearth goddess, a narcissistic water goddess, and a fallen seraph. They were riddled with flaws, insecurities, and baggage from a dozen different worlds. Naruto looked around the table, at Hestia laughing, at Aqua arguing with a shadow clone over who got the last piece of bread, at Gabriel watching them all with a soft, genuine smile. They were a mess, but they were his mess. They were his familia. They were his home. He realized then that Erebos and his silent night had made a critical error. They had attacked their powers, their identities, trying to break them as individuals. But they had failed to understand that their true strength wasn't in their divinity or their jutsu. It was here, at this table. It was in the bonds they were forging in this shared twilight, a strength born not of perfection, but of their shared, beautiful, human imperfections. The crisis had passed, leaving them not broken, but tempered. They were scarred, but they were stronger, not just as fighters, but as a family. And they would need every ounce of that strength for what was coming next. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Siege of Konoha. The peace that followed Hestia's recovery was fragile but precious. A new, more potent sense of purpose had settled over the inhabitants of the hearth. Their training took on a desperate edge. It was no longer about synergy, it was about survival. Aqua, high on her newfound status as the anti-void night specialist, practiced creating torrents of purified water, learning to shape them into lances and shields instead of just clumsy tidal waves. Hestia, inspired by Naruto's words, focused her power not on direct attacks, but on weaving a tangible, protective warmth, a field of home, that subtly revitalized her allies and sapped the will of any intruders Naruto's clones simulated. Gabriel, freed from the dogma of her celestial light, focused on pure combat. She fought like a Valkyrie, her spear a blur, her movements economical and deadly, her flight patterns now a weapon in themselves. Naruto oversaw it all, a quiet commander pushing his new family to be better, stronger, faster. He sparred with all of them, adapting his style to each. He was a raging storm against Gabriel's graceful dance, a slippery target against Aqua's deluges, and a patient, unmovable wall or Hestia to test her burgeoning support abilities against. In the quiet moments, he would study the remnants of the Silent Knight's armor. It was just dust now, but in Sage mode, he could feel the lingering echo of its wrongness. The faint conceptual signature of Erebos. The name itself felt like a curse, a shard of ice in his mind. He had told the others about the vision, about the galaxy being extinguished. And it had sobered them completely. This wasn't just their problem. This was a threat to everything. He was meditating by the lake, trying to extend his senses beyond their dimension, a fruitless, frustrating exercise like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane, when it happened. It was a sharp, violent tug in his soul, a pull not on his chakra or his body, but on his very existence. It was a feeling he knew intimately, a reverse summoning. But it wasn't keyed to a scroll or a blood contract. It was keyed to him. A deep, foundational part of his being was being used as an anchor. His eyes snapped open. He found it, he whispered, a cold dread washing over him. Gabriel, who was practicing aerial maneuvers overhead, swooped down, landing silently beside him. Naruto, what is it? The connection, he said, his voice tight. The one that brought me here. It's not a random tear in reality. It's a link, and he's using it. He didn't need to say who he was. Before he could explain further, the world twisted. Not a gentle unraveling like the first time, but a violent, wrenching tear. The serene twilight sky above them ripped open, not with golden light, but with a nauseating, sickly purple-black energy. It was a wound in the sky, a portal of raw void. But the portal didn't open into their valley. Naruto could feel it, through that terrible soul-deep connection. The other side of that portal wasn't the Nexus. It was a place he knew better than his own reflection. It was the sky above Konohagakure. Erebos wasn't attacking their new home. He was attacking his old one. No, Naruto breathed, the word a mix of horror and fury. He could feel it through the link, the sudden, blossoming panic of thousands of souls. The screams of his people. He's using you as a bridge, Gabriel realized, her face pale. Her eyes wide with horror as she stared at the vile rift. To get to your world. Aqua and Hestia ran from the house, drawn by the violent shift in the dimension's energy. What is that? Aqua yelled, pointing a shaking finger. It feels disgusting. That, Naruto said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, is a declaration of war. His eyes blazed a power that made the very air crackle. The Nine Tails chakra, raw and incandescent, flared to life, cloaking him in a coat of shimmering orange energy. The gentle guardian of the hearth was gone, replaced by the furious, battle-hardened hero of the Great War. He wants to take what I love. Naruto snarled, his gaze fixed on the portal. Fine, I'll introduce him to my family. He turned to them, his expression a mask of grim resolve. I'm going through. I don't know if you can follow. Hestia grabbed his arm, her small face set with a fierce determination that belied her size. Where our captain goes, the familia goes. We're not leaving you to fight alone. She's right, Aqua chimed in, striking a pose that was only slightly ruined by her trembling knees. Those void freaks are going to get a taste of my divine retribution. No one attacks my most reliable wallet. I mean, party members home and gets away with it. Gabriel simply met his gaze, her violet eyes burning with a righteous fire of their own. She unfurled her 12 wings, a magnificent, awe-inspiring sight. You stood for my home, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. We will stand for yours. Naruto looked at them, at their terrified but resolute faces. A fierce pride swelled in his chest, a warmth that pushed back the cold dread. He gave them a sharp, feral grin. All right, but this isn't a training exercise. Stay close, and try not to die. He didn't know the mechanics of this dimensional travel, but he knew one thing: he was the anchor. He focused on that feeling, on the tugging sensation, and then, with the force of his will, he pulled. He reached out with his chakra, wrapping it around the three goddesses, tethering them to him. "Let's go," he yelled, and leapt into the air, a golden comet aimed at the heart of the void rift. The three goddesses, caught in his wake, were pulled along with him. They plunged into the swirling purple-black chaos, the world of the hearth vanishing behind them. The transition was instantaneous and brutal. One moment, the familiar twilight. The next, the bright blue sky and warm sun of his home world. They emerged high above the Hokage monument, and the scene below was one of pure, unmitigated chaos. A massive, gaping maw of void energy, the portal they had just exited, hung in the sky like a suppurating wound. From it, a torrent of abominations poured forth. There were void hounds, dozens of them, bounding through the air and crashing onto rooftops. There were smaller, skittering things that looked like insects made of shadow, swarming through the streets. And there were the Nullsworn, armored, silent figures like the night, wielding swords of blackest night, engaging shinobi in terrifyingly one-sided combat. The sounds of battle were a deafening roar. Explosions rocked the village. Buildings were on fire. The screams of civilians mingled with the sharp, guttural shouts of shinobi. The shinobi of the Leaf were fighting with a desperate courage, but it was a losing battle. A Jonin's fireball jutsu would slam into a Nullsworn, only to be absorbed into its armor. A Chidori would pierce a void hound, but the wound would fill with shadow before the ninja could even retract his hand. Their ninjutsu, the lifeblood of their combat prowess, was being negated, consumed. Naruto saw it all in a single, heart-stopping panoramic sweep. He saw Kakashi on the roof of the Hokage Tower, his one Sharingan spinning wildly as he coordinated the defense, his lightning blade sputtering against a Nullsworn's shield. He saw Sakura, her fists glowing with green medical chakra, punching a void hound through a wall, only for it to rise again, its form reknitting. He saw Shikamaru, his face a mask of strained concentration, his shadow possession jutsu failing to hold the creatures who cast no shadows of their own. This was his home, his people, and they were being slaughtered. A wave of pure, incandescent rage washed through him. He didn't shout. He didn't announce his presence. He became a conduit for his fury. The golden chakra cloak around him exploded outward, and he entered Six Paths Sage mode. A black truth-seeking orb formed in his hand, which he shaped into a long, black staff. He was a son of golden light in the sky, a beacon of impossible power that drew every eye, both friend and foe. Naruto. Kakashi's voice, full of shock and relief, was a faint cry from below. Naruto turned to the goddesses behind him. Their faces were pale with shock at the scale of the carnage. Hestia, he barked, his voice the sharp command of a battlefield general. The center of the village. Near the hospital. Find the civilians, the injured. Create a sanctuary, a real hearth. Protect them. Can you do it? Hestia's eyes were wide with fear, but she saw the absolute faith in his gaze. She nodded, her jaw set. Yes, Captain, I can. She angled her body and shot downward, a tiny, determined meteor of warmth and light. Aqua, high ground, Hokage monument. You see those swarms of little ones. And the hounds. Wash them away, but be careful of the villagers. No city wiping floods. Aqua, seeing a stage worthy of her power, grinned, her fear replaced by manic excitement. Leave it to me. They're about to receive a divine cleansing. She rocketed towards the monument, trailing a stream of azure light. Gabriel. He turned to the seraph. Her face was grim, her violet eyes burning with a cold, holy fury at the sight of the void creatures. You're with me. Air support. The big ones. Anything I miss, you take it down. Don't let a single one get past us. With pleasure, she replied, her voice like steel. She summoned a spear of brilliant, white gold light, its purity a stark contrast to the void's filth. Let's get to work, Naruto growled. Then, they descended upon the battle like gods of vengeance. Naruto was a whirlwind of golden light and black truth-seeking rods. He moved with a speed that was barely a blur, intercepting a trio of Nullsworn that had cornered a group of Chunin. He didn't use a massive Rasengan. His movements were brutally efficient. A flick of his black staff shattered one Nulzworn's helmet. A spinning kick caved in another's chest plate. He disabled the third with a precise jab to its knee, then vanished, already moving to the next target. His shadow clones erupted into existence across the entire village, hundreds of them. They weren't just fighting, they were coordinating. They pulled civilians from burning buildings, relayed Shikamaru's strategic orders, and formed defensive lines around panicked academy students. The original Naruto was the tip of the spear, breaking the enemy's charge, while his clones were the shield, protecting the village's heart. High above, Gabriel was a celestial angel of death. The Nulzworn's nullification aura was effective, but it had a range. She stayed aloft, raining down dozens, then hundreds of light spears. Each one was an execution, striking the weaker void creatures with unerring accuracy. She was a blizzard of holy light, a one-woman artillery barrage that decimated the enemy's numbers, her 12 wings carrying her across the battlefield with impossible grace and speed. The villagers below looked up, their faces a mixture of terror and awe at the sight of the literal angel defending their homes. On the ground, Hestia landed near the main hospital, where Sakura and her medics were being overwhelmed with casualties. Ignoring the chaos, Hestia slammed her small hands onto the ground. "By my name and my flame," she chanted, her voice ringing a power no one in Konoha had ever heard, "I declare this ground a sanctuary. This is my hearth." A wave of brilliant, warm, orange-gold light erupted from her, spreading out in a massive circle, encompassing the hospital and the main square. It wasn't a physical wall, but a conceptual one. The smaller void creatures that touched its border shrieked and recoiled as if from a fire. The Nulzworn that tried to pass through found their steps growing heavy, their nihilistic purpose wavering in the face of such overwhelming, concentrated hope. Inside the barrier, injured shinobi felt their wounds begin to close. Their exhaustion recede, their spirits lift. Sakura, trying to stabilize a gravely wounded Jonin, gasped as the man's life force, which had been fading, suddenly surged back, his WOUNDs knitting together under her hands at a miraculous rate. She stared at the tiny goddess in the center of the golden light, her medical expertise utterly baffled and completely in awe. And then there was Aqua. She landed atop the fourth Hokage's stone head, looked down at the streets swarming with shadow insects and void hounds, and grinned like a maniac. "Behold, ye minions of darkness and despair," she bellowed, her voice magically amplified to carry across the village. "For your end has come. God's requiem." She threw her hands up, and the sky darkened. Not with the void's energy, but storm clouds that gathered in an instant. A torrential downpour began, but this was no ordinary rain. Each drop glowed with a soft, blue, holy light. It was purified water. It didn't harm the villagers or the buildings. But when it touched the void creatures, they dissolved like salt, hissing and steaming as their forms were undone by the sheer, conceptual purity. It was a divine cleansing, washing the streets clean of the smaller horrors. For a grand finale, she pointed at a particularly large pack of void hounds menacing a marketplace. God's blow, a colossal fist of water, glowing with holy power, descended from the heavens and slammed into the pack, obliterating them in a geyser of purified spray. It was flashy, loud, and ridiculously over the top. And it was working. The tide of the battle turned. The despair that had gripped Konoha was replaced by a surge of hope, embodied by the golden comet that was their hero, and the three strange, powerful goddesses he had brought with him. Naruto, sensing the smaller threats were being managed, turned his attention to the true problem. At the center of the invasion, floating directly beneath the portal, was a figure that radiated a power far greater than the other Nulzworn. It was the invasion's general. He was larger, his armor thicker and etched with pulsing purple runes. In his hand, he held not a sword, but a massive scythe, forged of the same light-devouring material. This was the Reaver. Anomaly. The Reaver's voice echoed in his mind, cold and dead. "You should have stayed in your hole. Your love is a beacon. And all beacons do is show the darkness where to feed." Naruto didn't reply. He shot toward the Reaver, his black staff extended. Their clash was a silent thunderclap. The Reaver's scythe drank the energy of Naruto's attack, but the sheer physical force of the Six Paths enhanced blow sent him hurtling backward. Their battle took to the skies, a devastating ballet of gold and black. The Reaver's scythe was a vortex of nullity, every swing erasing a chunk of reality. Naruto, with Gabriel flying cover, was a force of pure life. He couldn't destroy the scythe, so he fought the wielder. He used his truth-seeking orbs as shields, sacrificing them one by one to block the scythe's lethal edge while he hammered the Reaver with taijutsu that could shatter mountains. Gabriel harried him from above, her Chi spears forcing him to divide his attention. The Reaver swung his scythe in a wide arc, creating a wave of nothingness that forced her to dive away, her wingtips sizzling where the void touched them. You cannot win, the Reaver projected, blocking a Rasengan that still managed to crack his breastplate. Our master's victory is inevitable. All of this noise, all of this struggle, it will end. He will grant you all the gift of peace. We've got a word for that kind of peace, Naruto grunted, deflecting a blow and landing a solid kick to the Reaver's side. It's called death, and we're not interested. He saw his opening. The Reaver, enraged, raised his scythe for an ultimate attack, gathering a massive amount of void energy into its blade. Naruto formed a Rasenshuriken, its familiar, shrieking cry filling the air. He poured every ounce of his sage chakra into it. At the same time, Gabriel rose high above the battle. Naruto, now, she cried. She brought her hands together, and a column of pure, concentrated holy light, thicker and more powerful than any spear, lanced down from the heavens. The Reaver was caught between two opposing, ultimate attacks. Naruto's Rasenshuriken, the Pi NNACLE of shape and nature transformation, slammed into his front. Gabriel's divine judgment, a pillar of raw creation, crashed down on his back. The void energy in his side reacted violently, caught between the two forces. The resulting explosion was immense, a silent, blinding flash of gold, white, and black. When the light faded, the Reaver was gone. His armor, his scythe, his very being, had been annihilated. With the general's destruction, the remaining Nullsworn faltered. The portal in the sky wavered, its energy destabilizing. Naruto knew he had to close it. He flew up to the gaping wound, pouring his own life-filled chakra into it, using the link that Erebos had created against him, force-feeding the void with so much life it choked. But before the portal snapped shut, a final message, a whisper from the god of nothingness himself, broadcast not just to Naruto, but to every mind in the village, a cold promise that chilled every soul to the bone. The anomaly's love is a beacon, and all beacons draw the dark. I will take everything he holds dear, and then offer him the peace of my eternal silence. The portal collapsed in on itself with a final, sickening implosion, and the sky above Konoha was blessedly, beautifully blue again. The fighting stopped. The remaining void creatures dissolved into dust. Silence fell over the battered village, broken only by the crackle of flames and the groans of the wounded. Naruto descended, landing softly in the ruined central plaza. He looked over his home. Damaged, scarred, but standing. His people, terrified and battered, but alive. Kakashi, Shikamaru, and a wounded but conscious Sakura rushed to meet him. Their faces were a mixture of relief, shock, and a million questions. Naruto, what in the world was that? Kakashi asked, his visible eye wide as he stared at the golden chakra that still clung to his former student. Before Naruto could answer, his companions joined him. Gabriel landed with a soft whisper of wings, her celestial beauty stunning the battle-weary shinobi into silence. Hestia ran up, her sanctuary of light fading as she rejoined her captain, her face smudged with dirt but shining with pride. And Aqua floated down from the Hokage monument, striking a dramatic pose. You may all thank me now, she announced to the stunned crowd. Your village has been cleansed by the magnificent power of the goddess Aqua. The shinobi of Konoha stared. They stared at their hero, Naruto Uzumaki. They stared at the angel, the tiny goddess of warmth, and the blue-haired magical girl. He had saved them, as he always did. But this time, he had brought gods and monsters with him. He had saved his old home by bringing his new one to it, and in doing so, he had painted a target on them all, a target visible across entire realities. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Unholy Alliance. The silence that followed Aqua's declaration was thick enough to be carved. The shinobi of Konoha, trained from birth to analyze, categorize, and counter any threat, simply stared. They had faced rogue ninja, tailed beasts, and even a world-ending goddess of chakra. But this This was outside every frame of reference they possessed. An angel with 12 wings. A tiny girl who could create zones of miraculous healing, and a boisterous blue-haired woman who commanded tsunamis from the sky. And at the center of it all was Naruto, their hero. Glowing with a power that felt both familiar and terrifyingly alien. Kakashi was the first to recover, his mind, accustomed to processing impossible situations, kicking back into gear. He held U.P.A. hand to forestall the torrent of questions from the surrounding Jonin. His one visible eye moved from Gabriel, to Aqua, to Hestia, and finally settled on his former student. The usual lazy slant of his eye was gone, replaced by the sharp, focused gaze of the sixth Hokage. Naruto, he said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the stunned quiet. My office. Now, bring your friends. The Hokage's office, usually a place of chaotic paperwork and quiet authority, became the nexus of a world-altering conversation. The room was crowded. Naruto stood in the center, his six paths sage mode now dismissed, leaving him in his tattered orange and black jacket. Gabriel, Aqua, and Hestia stood slightly behind him, a silent, surreal tableau against the backdrop of the village panorama visible through the large window. Kakashi sat behind his desk, flanked by a grim-faced Shikamaru and a thoughtful-looking Sakura, who had left her medics to handle the cleanup within Hestia's lingering aura of healing. The story came out in a rush, a disjointed and fantastic tale that strained the limits of even a shinobi's imagination. Naruto explained his unraveling from reality, the nexus, the pocket dimension, and the nature of their foe, Erebos, the primordial god of nothingness. Gabriel spoke of the different pantheons, of heaven and the underworld, confirming that such cosmic entities existed, far beyond their own world's understanding. Hestia spoke of their home, the hearth, and how Naruto had built it for them. Aqua, for her part, mostly interjected to emphasize her own greatness and the high quality of her water-based attacks, which Shikamaru surprisingly did not dismiss, instead making a quiet, thoughtful note. So, let me get this straight, Shikamaru said finally, rubbing his temp. Less as if trying to stave off a universe-sized headache. You were kidnapped by a rip in reality, teamed up with 3 actual goddesses, and are now being hunted by a nihilistic god monster from before creation who wants to erase everything. And because he's interested in you, he used you as a bridge to attack Konoha. Pretty much, yeah, Naruto confirmed with a nod. What a drag, Shikamaru muttered, though his eyes were sharp. His mind already racing, calculating variables he'd never dreamed of. This Erebos, his forces, the Nullsworn. Their primary ability is nullification. It absorbs ninjutsu. It negates divine power. Taijutsu is effective, but they regenerate. And their very presence is conceptually poisonous to life. Aqua-chan's water hurt them, Hestia offered helpfully. And Naruto-kun's special Recentrican. Purity and life force, Shikamaru mused, looking at Naruto. Direct conceptual opposites. This isn't a battle of chakra natures. It's a war of philosophy, fought with swords and fireballs. We can't just fight harder. We have to fight smarter. Kakashi leaned forward, his hands steepled. We were lucky this time, Naruto. You were here, but we can't rely on you being our sole line of defense against a multiversal threat. Erebos attacked Konoha to hurt you, to isolate you. He wants us to fear you, to see you as the source of this danger. He glanced out the window at the damaged village. And for some, that fear will be easy to sow. We need a plan. We need allies. It was Gabriel who spoke next, her voice calm and clear. This threat is greater than any one world. Erebos does not distinguish between mortal, angel, or devil. All existence is noise to him. If he succeeds, all realms will fall into silence. The pantheons must be made to understand this. You think they'll listen? Naruto asked, skepticism coloring his tone. Your friend Uriel wasn't exactly in a cooperative mood. Uriel is a zealot, Gabriel corrected. But he is not the entirety of heaven. My brother, Michael, is the acting head of the Seraphim. He is logical. He is reasonable. The visual evidence of a full-scale void invasion on a mortal world, broadcast through my divine connection, will be persuasive. I can request a parley. Shikamaru's eyes lit up with strategic fire. And the others? You mentioned devils. Gabriel's expression became complicated. The underworld is ruled by the four great Satans. The chief among them is Seer's Lucifer. Angels and devils have a history. An alliance would be unprecedented. An enemy that wants to erase everything is also unprecedented, Shikamaru countered. They have a vested interest in not being erased. What about other factions? There are the fallen angels, the Norse pantheon, the Greek gods where Hestia originates from, Gabriel listed. The divine realms are rife with political tension and ancient grudges. Forging a grand coalition will be a diplomatic nightmare. Then we don't forge a grand one, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the strategic debate with simple, decisive clarity. We forge a smart one. We start with the ones who have the most to lose and the most to offer. Heaven and the underworld. Get them in a room. Show them the enemy. The rest will either fall in line or be left behind. It was a bold, almost arrogant plan. And it was pure Naruto. The next few days were a blur of activity. While Konoha's shinobi and civilians worked tirelessly to repair their homes, a different kind of construction was underway. Gabriel, using a secure, high-frequency channel of divine communication, sent a formal request for parley to both the seventh heaven and the capital of the underworld, Lilith. She presented the situation not as a plea for help, but as a grave warning of a mutual existential threat. Backed by her own verifiable sensory records of the battle, the response was faster than any of them expected. Michael agreed to a meeting, his message carrying a tone of grave concern that was a world away from Ural's zealous fury. More surprisingly, a reply came from Seer's Lucifer, conveyed through his queen, Graphia Lucifuge. The underworld had also detected the anomalous void energies and the mass erasure of life. They were willing to talk. The neutral ground chosen was, by Naruto's insistence, their own pocket dimension. The hearth. It was secure, defensible, and under their control. The day of the council arrived under the valley's perpetual twilight. Naruto stood at the door of their house, flanked by his three goddesses. Hestia was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Aqua was trying to look dignified and important, though she kept fidgeting with her hair. Gabriel was a statue of serene composure, but Naruto could feel the tension in her posture. Two portals opened simultaneously on the lawn before them. One was a swirl of brilliant, holy gold. The other was a vortex of crimson and black demonic energy. From the golden portal emerged Michael, the seraph who now led heaven. He was breathtaking, with golden hair and a kind, handsome face, but his 12 wings carried a weight of immense responsibility. Behind him, looking profoundly unhappy and resentful, was Uriel. They were flanked by two stoic, heavily armed angelic guards. From the demonic portal stepped Seer's Lucifer, a man with crimson hair and a disarmingly gentle smile that did nothing to hide the terrifying abyss of power behind his eyes. Beside him was his wife, Graphia, her silver hair and maid uniform a stark contrast to the raw demonic power she radiated. The two factions appeared, and the air in the valley crackled with millennia of ingrained hostility. The angel's light seemed to recoil from the devil's darkness. Uriel glared at Seer's with open hatred. Graphia's expression was an unreadable mask of ice. Michael, Seer's said, his voice a smooth, pleasant baritone. It has been a long time. Seer's, Michael replied, his tone courteous but strained. I wish the circumstances were less dire. Their attention then turned as one to the group standing on the porch. To Naruto. They saw a young man in an orange jacket, whose power felt like a sun, a serene but defiant Gabriel, and two lesser goddesses. This was the group that had called the two great biblical powers to a meeting. The meeting took place around the rough-hewn table inside the hearth. It was surreal. Angels and devils sat opposite each other, the air thick with tension, with Hestia nervously offering everyone cups of water, which Graphia politely accepted and Uriel pointedly ignored. Naruto didn't bother with pleasantries. He placed the black orb containing the first void hound on the center of the table. The oppressive cold it radiated made even Seer's smile falter. Naruto then recounted the battle, the nature of the Nullsworn, and his vision of Erebos. Shikamaru, present as Konoha's strategic advisor, laid out the tactical implications. This entity does not seek conquest, Shikamaru concluded, his voice sharp. It seeks annihilation. Your power, your people, your very existence are nothing more than fuel for its goal of universal silence. We can fight it separately, and we will be extinguished one by one. Or we can fight it together. Michael looked at the orb, then at Gabriel. Sister, you have seen this with your own eyes. You stand by this mortal's testimony. I do, Gabriel said firmly. I have felt my own light consumed by this void. I have seen it slaughter the people of this world. The threat is real, Michael. Sears leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Naruto. You have fought these beings twice now, Naruto Uzumaki. And you have won. You seem to be the focal point of this entire conflict. What do you propose? Before Naruto could answer, Uriel slammed his gauntleted fist on the table. Cracking the wood. Propose. We should be proposing his immediate eradication. This anomaly is the cause of all this. He is a beacon for this darkness. His profane mix of mortal and demonic energy is an affront to all that is sacred. He has corrupted a seraph and now seeks to drag heaven and hell into his personal war. Erebos had not been idle. The god of nothingness did not need armies to sow chaos. He could whisper. He could plant seeds of doubt. And in the fertile ground of Uriel's zealous heart, those seeds had taken root and blossomed into poisonous conviction. He had been shown visions, a future where Naruto, drunk on his own power and his ability to command gods and devils, became a tyrant far worse than the Sage of Six Paths. A future where he unite the factions only to rule them with an iron fist. Uriel, be silent, Michael commanded, his voice sharp. No, I will not be silent, Uriel retorted, standing up, his eyes blazing with fanatical light. Can you not see? This is a test from our Father. A test of our faith. This creature Erebos offers a simple oblivion. But this mortal, he offers a future of subjugation. He is the greater evil. His power to unite us is the proof. Suddenly, Uriel moved. He wasn't aiming for Naruto. He was aiming for the Alliance. A brilliant spear of holy light materialized in his hand, and he lunged, not at Sears, but at the far more vulnerable Shikamaru, the mortal strategist at the table. If he could kill the mortal leadership, shatter this fragile truce before it even began, he could save heaven from this corrupting influence. The room exploded into motion. Sears vanished in a blur of red, reappearing to intercept the two angelic guards who had moved to support Uriel. Michael cried out his brother's name in shock and horror. But the target was Naruto's people. His friend. The assassination attempt was fast, brutal, and completely unexpected. Shikamaru's eyes widened, his body too slow to react to the seraph's speed. But he wasn't alone. A wall of shimmering, purified water erupted in front of him, intercepting Uriel's spear. Aqua stood on the table, her face a mask of fury. Nobody hurts my familia's boring, spiky-haired friend. The spear sizzled as it hit the water, its holy energy being corroded by her conceptual power. At the same time, Hestia threw her arms out. A wave of her divine fire, not hot, but conceptually a representation of protective warmth, erupted from her, slamming into Uriel. It didn't burn him, but it felt like wading through molasses, his zealous charge lowing as the very idea of home and sanctuary warred against his violent intent. The distraction was all that was needed. Uriel's main target had always been Naruto, and he used the opening to pivot. His true attack, a second spear of light aimed directly at Naruto's heart. But he never saw Gabriel. She moved, not as a seraph, but as a bodyguard. She threw herself in front of Naruto, her wings wrapping around him. The holy spear, a weapon that could unmake high-class devils, slammed into her side with a sickening crunch. Gabriel cried out in pain, her divine blood, shimmering like liquid gold, spattering onto Naruto's jacket. She had shielded him from an attack by her own kind. Time seemed to slow down. Naruto saw the golden blood. He saw the pained gasp on Gabriel's face as she stumbled into him. And something inside him, a carefully controlled restraint he had cultivated since the end of the war, snapped. A wave of crimson, malevolent chakra exploded from him. It was not the warm, golden light of the sage mode. It was the raw, unrestrained fury of the Nine Tails. His eyes bled from blue to slitted red, his teeth elongated into fangs, and the air grew thick with a killing intent. Chi so potent that it made Sears Lucifer, the ruler of hell, take an involuntary step back. Uriel, who had been pushing through Hestia's power, froze, his zealous fury replaced by a primal terror. He looked up into the face of the demon he had always believed Naruto to be. Naruto didn't yell. He didn't form a jutsu. He simply moved. He was a red blur, appearing directly in front of Uriel. He grabbed the seraph's throat, his chakra-enhanced grip denting the celestial armor. He lifted Uriel off the ground with one hand, the angel's legs kicking uselessly. The temptation was overwhelming. To crush his throat, to end this threat to his family, to his friends. To squeeze until the zealous light in his eyes went out forever. He could feel Kurama's rage mingling with his own, urging him on. Kill him. He hurt our family. End him. His grip tightened. Uriel choked, his face turning purple. Naruto. Don't. The voice was weak, pained, but clear. It was Gabriel. She was leaning against the table, one hand clutching the bleeding wound in her side, her face pale but her eyes pleading. He looked from Uriel's terrified face to hers. He saw the pain, but he also saw the fear, not of Uriel, but for him. For his soul, for what he was about to become. The red haze in his vision receded. The killing intent, which had been a physical pressure in the room, vanished. With a final surge of disgust, he hurled Uriel across the room. The seraph slammed into the wall and crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. Naruto's chakra cloak faded, leaving him breathing heavily, his eyes returning to their normal blue. He turned his back on the disgraced angel and rushed to Gabriel's side, his hands glowing with the gentle green of medical ninjutsu, an art Sakura had insisted he master. Get out, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet, not looking at the cowering form of Uriel or the shocked face of Michael. Tell Michael that the next time his dogs come for my family, I won't be so merciful. The betrayal had failed, but it had shattered everything. The Grand Alliance was a ruin before it had even been built. Michael, his face a mask of shame and sorrow, retrieved his brother and vanished through the golden portal without another word. Seer's ex Lucifer, however, remained. He looked at the scene, at Naruto gently healing an archangel, at the two lesser goddesses standing protectively over him. At the cracked table and the lingering scent of ozone and blood. He smiled, a true, genuine smile this time. It was a terrifying sight. How interesting, the Devil King mused. Heaven is crippled by its own dogma. But you fight for something much simpler. How very refreshing. He turned to leave. The underworld will honor the spirit of this alliance. Not for heaven's sake, and not for your world's. But because I find myself wanting to see what you do next, Naruto Uzumaki. With a final nod, he and Graphia stepped back through their portal, leaving Naruto and his family alone in their broken meeting room. The plan was in shambles. They were more isolated than ever. But as Naruto looked at Gabriel's wound, at Aqua and Hestia standing guard, he knew one thing for certain. They couldn't rely on angels or devils. They could only rely on each other. He looked at Shikamaru, who was staring at a map of the elemental nations spread out on a separate table. Shikamaru, Naruto said, his voice hard as steel. We're done with diplomacy. We're going on the offensive. Shikamaru looked up, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. What a drag. I was hoping you'd say that. Chapter 6 End.